There's lots of work going on in different discrete policy areas, whether these are around nature conservation or around the development of offshore renewable energy or around aquaculture. And I think what the report shows is that the spatial pressures in our seas, and the report was done on the basis of the UK, are indeed growing very significantly. And when you look ahead to 2030 and then 2 scenarios in 2050, it's very evident that there will be severe pressure on fishing, with likely very significant displacement of fishing. And I think we feel collectively across the industry that there has not been sufficient regard to understand the level of that displacement and the impact of it.
There was something on the radio this morning about the Scottish Government wanting to return land and seas to nature, whatever that means. But I'm also aware of there's talk of a new national marine plan for Scotland. Part of that marine plan would involve designated certain geographical areas for fishing, and nothing but fishing. I don't know exactly how that would work. I was wondering if Elspeth, if you could maybe say what you think about that.
Some people say, well, couldn't you just designate certain areas for fisheries and, that would solve a problem? Well, it's not as straightforward as that. We don't control fish. We don't know where they go. They move around. Some of our key commercial stocks are moving northwards, possibly as a consequence of warming waters. So the idea of designating particular areas for fishing might work in some cases for some species, but I think we would be very concerned that you would lock yourself in to decisions that might work for today but don't work for tomorrow.
And we have examples of MPAs that have been in place for 5-6 years that we can actually look at what's happened to those fleets, and the numbers have went down. So we have to be looking at a balance of that, and I think the important thing for me is the science. And we don't have a good baseline science for a lot of these decisions. And what I'm very concerned about is that fishermen are not being involved in a lot of these decisions either. Their observational data in terms of temperature, in terms of the type of sediment that's in that area, what's likely to happen, is not really being taken on board, I feel, at the level it should be. And can they move somewhere else? No, they can't. It has to be reflexive, continuous, and we have to know that if we are going to put other species in, we may cause a problem. And just finally, with Broad Bay and Western Isles, my colleague Duncan McInnes will talk of this often, it was closed off over 20 years ago, and now it's very, very full of starfish, which is an apex predator in that environment and basically predates another fish. So what was a productive commercial fisheries area is now no longer the case. And these kind of things, we might have good intentions, but closing off an area may make it stagnant, may not work. So it's about the good science baseline and regular updates on that.
I don't think our industry would for a moment suggest that we don't need to take action to combat climate change and that our industry isn't going to have to adapt to that just like every other. No. But this is not the only way to generate electricity. It may be the cheapest and quickest way to build renewables, but it's not the only one. And it's not the only thing we can do in the sea. It's not even a permanent solution. A 25-year wind farm construction will provide a temporary boost to an extent to the nation's energy supply. But if in return we permanently lose our food production capacity, then that's another aspect of national security that we've damaged in the long term for a short-term gain in another field. At the end of the day, you can't eat a wind turbine. We still need to produce food ourselves, far more than we do, I think.
Elspeth MacDonald, you said earlier about how certain stocks are migrating, or they're moving. Not migrating, because that's a different thing, but where they would normally migrate to and from is moving northwards, potentially because of warming waters. Is there a risk that somebody might look at that, there's no cod in that part of the sea anymore, so that must be overfishing? Or is that oversimplifying things?
No, you're absolutely right. And I think that's the challenge that we've had with the narrative around North Sea cod, because I think it is generally recognised, recognised in the scientific community and the fishing industry, that cod are migrating northwards. Many of our whitefish species appear to be. Now, we know that cod in the southern North Sea are not very abundant, probably because of this northward drift of the species, but they're very abundant in Scottish waters and around the northern North Sea. So the science here is not keeping up with the changes in our oceans, essentially, and the changes in our environment. So yes, there absolutely is a risk that the disappearance, perhaps, of a species from a particular area is seen as being a consequence of fishing, whereas actually it's a consequence of natural processes that we have no control over.
I'll take the nodding heads along the panel there as being in broad agreement of that, so I won't ask the same question of the other panel members. I was going to ask about whether you thought the existing planning processes for offshore developments pay sufficient attention to the impact on fisheries. We'll take that as a no based on your previous answers. But if the fisheries sector was to be involved in those planning discussions, specifically at which points should that be taking place?
We need to be involved at the earliest possible stage. What we've seen recently in the Celtic Sea is, for the first time, the Crown Estate involving the fishing industry and fishing communities at the very first stages of that planning process, which is very, very valuable, what they call the areas of search stage. That's really important for both the offshore fishing fleets and the inshore boats that will be affected by cable routes. And particularly small communities need to be involved early with broad, on-the-ground consultation. They can't be expected to look for planning notices in national newspapers and check every possible avenue for them. So early and frequent involvement at a community level is vital.
I think one of the most problematic stages is when we have contractors in to do the work, because you can sit down with a power company and you can agree that you want to get a route that suits everybody, but the minute they pull external contractors in to actually do the work, if they decide to change it and cash is king, they will change it. And that's when you can have detrimental issues to fishing, but it's when it becomes operational that we've always experienced terrible problems.
Through the duration of these projects, construction of offshore wind farms, for example, that is not a quick job. These fields take a long time to build. They do have some opportunities to discuss what's the right route for the cable from the wind farm to the shore, and working with fisheries to try and reduce the impact that cable route has on our fisheries is really important, particularly at the moment for the inshore fleet. So early engagement, absolutely yes, but I think also engagement throughout.